This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome everyone to the Northeast Citizen Advisory Committee meeting. Call to order. We want to do introductions. I feel like we know everyone here, but I'm Tally. I am the vice chair sitting in for Jennifer Rasmussen. Okay. How about Kelly? Do you want to go next?
Kelly Huckestein on the Citizens Advisory Committee.
And Dirk.
And I see Ian. Do you want to shout out, say hello?
Hey everyone, Ian Sisson, County Planning staff.
Welcome. Great to have you. And Gail, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, Gail Hendrickson, Community Development Director.
Okay. Now, let's see, do review of the meeting summary from October 8th and November 12th. Do we actually read through the summary, or is it just we accept that we received it?
Yeah, are there any corrections, additions, or deletions that anyone noted?
No.
Nope.
That's fine. I wasn't at the, I think it was maybe the October one that I wasn't there, but do you have anything, Dirk?
No, I wasn't there. So looks good to me.
Okay. Doesn't look like we have any public comment or input. I don't know. Does Ian count as the public?
He's become our new backup staff member, but he may actually have some things he wants to say because he did draft the memo that's in your package this evening.
Great.
Yeah, I don't have any comments for you up front, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the memo or other materials.
Okay. Great, thank you. Jed, do you want to introduce yourself? I see you just popped on.
Sure, I'm Jed Arnold. I'm the stewardship coordinator for Hampton Family Forests. We manage a substantial portion of the Big Creek watershed.
Welcome. Okay, so we'll jump into the review of Goal 5 topics, federal wild and scenic rivers.
Okay, so if we start with Table 1, basically that contains the policies related to these 4 topics that are, or inventories that are listed in Goal 5. And there aren't many, there's only 4 policies that we would need to look at to see if you would agree with staff recommendations or if you had any changes or things that you wanted to discuss about these 4 particular policies. Ian also included the related policies that are in Goal 8, which deals with recreational lands. And so those are put into the packet just to give you some context and additional information about how these all interact in the plan, but you don't need to address the ones in gray this evening. So on Table 1, we're just looking at these 4 policies.
Okay. So do you want me to read these before we talk about them?
I guess if there's a general consensus, if anybody wanted to pull any of the 4 in particular for further discussion, otherwise you could just by consensus agree with staff recommendations and we could move on to Table 2.
Okay. Does anyone have anything they want to pull for discussion? Okay, looks like we can move on to Table 2.
Okay, so Table 2, we did the same thing but pulled policies that specifically came from the Northeast Community Plan. And so these are the policies that were would relate to either federal wild scenic rivers, the state scenic waterways, the trails, or the scenic views and sites. And we've put staff recommendations in there as well. For each of the policies that you see here, we did recommend retaining each policy. And also on the historic area policy number 4, just to add an additional comment that obviously the Recreational Lands Advisory Board for the county would probably want to weigh in on that policy as well. So are there any policies that anyone wants to pull for additional discussion or revision?
Anyone have anything they want to pull out? Okay. I think we agree with the staff recommendation.
Okay. All right, then our final table, which is where you all get to have some fun. These are new issues that will be coming up that we can foresee for the next 20 years, what the issue is, and don't worry so much about drafting the actual policy. We can work on that if you want, but really what I would like to get down are just the issues that we would foresee that would affect either the rivers, the state waterways, trails, scenic views and sites. And Ian, I know you're the second, but would you be comfortable just discussing the 2 issues and proposed policies that you put in there?
Sure. So in the background memo, I listed each of the resources that are being discussed today. And 3 of them, the first 3, I think, are basically we're just required to acknowledge in Goal 5 whether any of those resources are in Clatsop County. So Gail, if you could go down to the next page, or sorry, up a couple of pages to the second page of the memo. There we go. So for federal wild and scenic rivers, the county is required to acknowledge in Goal 5 any that are designated in Clatsop County, which currently there are none. And if you could scroll down a little bit further, the next item is state scenic waterways. And recently a section of the Nehalem River was adopted as a state scenic waterway. So the recommendation I made in table 3 is that we do basically what we're required to do per the Oregon administrative rules, which is add that designated section to our inventory of significant Goal 5 resources. And then the next item was approved Oregon recreation trails, and similar to state scenic waterways and federal wild and scenic rivers, the county is required to acknowledge in Goal 5 any approved Oregon recreation trails. And so the 2 in Clatsop County currently are the Oregon Coast Trail and the Saddle Mountain Trail. So again, the recommendation is to add those to our inventory under Goal 5. And then back to the memo, the other item that we have on the agenda today is scenic views and sites. And we are not required to have an inventory of scenic views and sites. But in the original comprehensive plan, it was determined that we would include that. And one important thing I think to note with scenic views and sites is the inventory of existing adopted resources, and then also the process that we would need to go through for adding to that. So if you remember, with almost all Goal 5 resources, we do the what's called the EC analysis, which is economic, environmental, social, and what was the other one? I'm blanking on it.
Energy.
Energy, thank you. And so you basically look at what the resource is that's proposed to be inventoried under Goal 5 and address the consequences under each of those categories of conflicting uses on that resource. And so in order to add to our inventory of scenic views and sites, which is very broadly defined, those items would need to go through that formal Goal 5 review process. So I didn't make recommendations specific to that category, but that certainly could be open for discussion today.
Okay, thank you, Ian. So, sorry, I'm trying to listen and watch my toddler at the same time, so I just want to make sure I'm fully understanding. I might have you repeat a little bit of that. So we're, I see your list of different sites in Clatsop County, and is the idea that we would go through that list and see how they fit into those 3 E categories, or can you kind of clarify for me again what exactly we're trying to do with this list?
So this list is currently included in Goal 5. So back when the original comprehensive plan Goal 5 element was devised, these items were determined to be significant scenic views and sites within the county. So there are, it looks like 4 that are within the Northeast planning area. So those might be of particular interest to your group. And I think what we might want to think about with those existing inventoried sites is whether they are sufficiently protected from conflicting uses. Because when you protect a resource under Goal 5, the idea is that you're preserving it in some way. And so if the group feels that those resources aren't sufficiently protected from conflicting uses, something you could discuss is what measures could be taken to better protect them. Or if those resources are determined, if you think those aren't very significant and they're having some kind of implication on other uses that would be desired but are not able to be followed through upon because these resources are overly protected, you could talk about potentially reducing their protections. So that's one discussion you could have. And then the other would be if there are any resources not on this list that you think should be, then we could consider those.
Okay, thanks. So,
We want to just go through each one of those ones in the Northeast and just check in on it, or?
yeah, that sounds good.
I was wondering if maybe Jed could speak to the Napa Gorge at Big Creek, because I know he showed me that gorge and talked about, you know, Hampton and the area around it. So I'd like to get a refresher. If you'd be willing, Jed.
Yeah, sure. So the gorge itself is Hampton-owned land. Currently, the Hampton has, in my brain, it's a layer, it's a GIS layer, but there's a what would be called, I guess, a special conservation status applied to the gorge land. So we don't operate any, we don't do any harvesting or other non-safety related operations within the gorge. I don't know. I don't think that decision was made because of anything contained in the comprehensive plan. My understanding is that's just the decision that was made when the Hampton family bought the property. Was that since it was, a resource, it is quite scenic and it's a recreational resource for the community, that they just put that special conservation layer on the gorge, or even though the main line runs straight through it. So it is, we have special restrictions on what we do in that area.
But is that just a decision that your company made? If they were to sell it sometime down the line, could that just be reversed?
I believe so. I think it could be. Most of the gorge itself, it would be, I would say, unwise to operate in there. It's pretty steep terrain, but I don't think it would be illegal. I was surprised if anyone did it, that's for sure. I think that my understanding, I guess it's something that I've never looked into, or I'm not even sure the company's ever looked into, because we've, just we don't mess around on the gorge. But off the top of my head, I don't think that it would necessarily be illegal to operate in there, at least outside of the normal riparian, buffers and that sort of thing.
Is that something that Gail or Ian would weigh in on? As far as that sounds like a voluntary overlay for effectively a conservation area on the main line.
Yeah, so a lot of what they're going to do, and I don't know how this would play out with Forest Practices Act, and that's a good question. I'm just not familiar enough with how the system works to really say if they did come in at some point and decided that they wanted to log in there, and maybe technology makes it possible at some point in the future. And if we did have policies in our comprehensive plan, I'm not sure how that would play out, which one would take precedence. It's a good question.
I think I was there yesterday, and it is quite stunning, but I don't think we need anything more or less than is on the book. So I'm fine with the status quo.
I don't know. I mean, this is something that we can do too. And like Jed was just saying that maybe he would, I don't know if he would be willing to help with this, but I would be curious to know, just with that steepness of the canyon and some like what would be allowed in the Forest Practices Act in there, just to like know the level of like what he was saying, like what would be legal or not. I would be curious to know that, just so that we could have a more informed idea of what could possibly happen to then make the decision to then further protect, I don't know if that makes sense.
So one thing I might throw out there, and this is not speaking as an official representative of the company, is that if there was an interest in putting some additional protection on that area, rather than possibly getting into the legal headache of having it done through the comprehensive plan, being that Hampton currently owns and manages that land, and to my knowledge has absolutely no intent of ever operating in there, I think it might be possible to work out a conservation easement or something that would grant much more legally certain protection to that area, rather than doing it as part of the comp plan. So if that's something that the county wants to pursue, I'm happy to open up that discussion.
I don't know if this is the section, necessarily that this sort of action would take place in this particular section. Just, considering scenic views and sites, I guess that would be my observation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer for sure, and I don't know how this would interact with, precedent law, not precedent, but preemption laws. But I just want, wanting to even avoid that headache, if the desire is there, we might be able to just do it in a way that's much more straightforward, rather than trying to figure out what the legalities of the comp plan in relation to this are. But
well, and I think like a lot of what would apply to this particular site would have effects then in different areas of goal 5 and some of the other goals, because of like water and riparian zones and things like that. I mean, like and I might be misunderstanding this part of the goal. It was kind of hard for me to like really parse out scenic views and sites from all the other like uses, like it was hard for me to like really appraise these based like purely on like an aesthetic property. And I feel like that's what this part of the goal is asking for. Maybe Gail, you can like speak to that. Like, like it's hard for me not to, like, a lot of these things are connected clearly. So I just, it seems like outstanding scenic views and sites like this is kind of more of an aesthetic thing. I don't know if that's an accurate assessment or not, Gail.
I would say that would be accurate, yeah.
If I could chime in a little bit too, I was just looking back through what we currently have adopted under Goal 5, which is kind of a background report about these resources and what conflicting uses exist. And so forest management was discussed as a potentially conflicting use for some of these sites, and it sounded like For many of them, the land manager was voluntarily, as Jed was describing, was voluntarily preserving the designated scenic areas already, and it may, correlate to just the difficulty of logging in some of those areas because of things like steep slopes or other sensitive resources that they're required to avoid anyway. But the Goal 5 process in general involves looking at potentially conflicting uses and weighing the value of the conflicting use versus the resource being considered for protection. So that's basically what the process is, and then implementing ordinances to protect that resource from conflicting uses. So the policies that were presented in those tables are all we currently have. I'm not aware of any implementing ordinances in the zoning code or standards document that directly relate to these scenic resources. So, again, it would be interesting to look at the Goal 5 analysis of conflicting uses and to weigh those different uses and determine, if additional regulations are appropriate, or if, maybe landowners, like Judge was saying, would be amenable to things like conservation easements or deed restrictions or development restrictions.
I really agree with what, or at least I can't speak for Ian, but what he said about, landowners voluntarily taking actions because it makes the most sense. And practically speaking, I don't think they, could have forest operations in that area, harvesting in the gorge with the steepness and the, considering all other regulations that are, and to me, it makes a lot of sense. They're doing what they're doing because it makes the most sense. And ultimately, I would say if it's not broken, don't fix it. But just thinking kind of related to the point that Ian made, that if it doesn't make sense, that people would set it aside anyway, like the mouth of Blind Slough is used to be owned by James River, which is now Georgia Pacific or whatever, but they it had no economic benefit for the company, so they basically set it aside. And I think the Nature Conservancy assumed responsibility for it because practically it wasn't any economic value to them, and the value of that gorge would perhaps be similar.
Well, in the policies, I mean, it maybe we could go back to that and the languages around it, because it says, one of the policies, I'm just, if you want to scroll back up, Gail, is saying that the county will work with, cooperate with state, federal agencies and private groups. So maybe we could even add more language around that, making that more robust. And maybe add a little bit around that so that it is more obvious that we want to work with the private, I don't know if that makes sense, and I don't know exactly what language that would look like, but if I would just say, if we're going to rely on that, I would want it to be a little bit more explicit in the actual policy in some form or another.
Reading in that Goal 5 background report, I also noticed that, at least at the time the plan was originally written, there were scenic conservancy areas per Oregon Department of Forestry. And so that might be something to look into, is if they have mapping of those scenic conservancy areas, if those still exist. And presumably the landowners, land managers would know if those exist on land they manage and what the regulations are. But it might be good information to include in our background reports.
Okay, so are we? I like the idea of getting the easement. That seems like a good way to go about it if we think that the property owners would be interested in that. And, you know, I understand the perspective of it. You know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But like, you just don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the future. And if we're just relying on norms, that then, you know, something could change. If it's something we want to be protected, then I think there's no reason why we shouldn't, you know, if it's easy to do, get that written down.
Well, and maybe, yeah, I agree, Tally. And I think, like, you know, Gail's writing that note in there that maybe part of that language that we change is that the county is going to like encourage private property owners to consider like easements or some, you know, something around that, so that it's like suggesting that option, even if it's not like saying that the option must be done, but that it like is encouraged, or the county will work with, or some kind of language around that, so that there is that intent, even if you know, it's not like a hardline policy, you know, which I know is scary to a lot of folks.
I don't think too many property owners would get on board with that. So I don't agree, but I'm one member of 3 years. So.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, it doesn't have to be like this will happen, but like just the fact that like acknowledging that that is like a possibility or encouraged potentially. Like, and that's what I mean. Like, Dirk, like I agree, and I don't want to make it sound like, you know, that the government's paying for anyone's property or anything like that, but that like, you know, some kind of like careful language around that these sites are like valued, and that, you know, the county would be interested in working with people around easements or whatever. I don't know. Like I said, I don't have like a good idea of how to make it sound respectful, but.
So what we want to do is facilitate opportunities for private property owners who want to do this, but maybe don't know how, or aren't even aware that maybe they have something significant on their properties.
I mean, yeah, I think something like that would sound good. I just think like if we're going to designate these spots, like what's the point of designating them if like we don't have any intention behind that, I guess is my question.
We can always remove the word easements and put in something more generalized, or the committee could decide to do that. Easements popped out of my mouth because I worked for a land conservancy organization for a long time, so that's the first thing that pops into my head because that's what we did. But there are other tools that exist that are, one of the big problems with the easements is then you have to find an organization that's willing to manage them. And it could be the county, but there's some overhead there. You know, you might be able to get somewhere like the NCLC to do it, but there's some, you know, you have to give them motivation to provide that service. So there are other legal tools out there that could be used. So a more general term like, you know,
Overlay? Is that what you're looking for?
yeah,
Overlay?
yeah, or, you know, protected conservation protections, or if I think of anything that sounds good, I can shoot Gail an email.
That sounds good. Thanks, Jed.
So is this Big Creek Gorge something that like anyone in the public can go to, or, I mean, is Hampton okay with that?
Yeah, well, nearly all of Hampton's lands in Clatsop County are open for public recreation, except during times where public safety is an issue. So almost all that usually just means during peak fire season. And there are no plans to change that. We may go to a quote permit system like Greenwood uses at some point in the future, just to get people's email addresses so we have a way of communicating with them, like, hey, the gates are closed. But we allow drive-in access. A lot of other landowners, don't allow that year round. So it is, you can go in there and recreate and fish, and just watch out for the log trucks during the business week.
So the next one, I don't know if all of these are going to kind of fall into what we already were talking about, but Nat Creek Falls. Does anyone know anything about that?
I've heard a lot of people hiking there. I've actually never been there. I think I don't. You think you have to cross private property to get to it, but
Well, it's the fishery is. I think that was something when I was reading the old Goal 5. I don't like not the fish hatchery. You go through that and that's where I've accessed the trail to the falls.
Yeah,
before.
that's my understanding.
Yeah,
as well, Kelly.
Those are all around there.
Yeah,
but I don't know. Oh, go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say I believe we've been up there, and it's just you access the trailhead at the hatchery. I think Greenwood or another organization may own the land adjacent to it, but you might be crossing their land on the way up. I thought it was ODFW managed up to the falls, but
I don't know, so I can't say. So I regret that I haven't been there at this point already. So.
Well, and the falls are pretty close, like to the fish hatchery. It's not a big trail, but then there is an additional trail that follows the creek back like quite a bit. And so I don't know exactly if this is more talking about the falls that are like right behind the fish hatchery, and that's like, I don't know how big of an area, which falls, if it's all the little falls or what.
I think I was thinking of there's some larger falls I think that are further set back, not on that little walk around the hatchery. Is my impression.
Right, and the trail doesn't go all the way to that larger fall but I know that you can access it through the top of that larger, longer, steeper trail. But yeah.
So is it accurate, Ian, to say that none of these sites currently has any specific protection through the comp plan?
Nothing beyond the policies that are in table 1, and I don't recall what was in table 2 as far as Northeast area policies. So based on the background report again from the Goal 5 element, it looks like the only conflicting uses that were mentioned for any of the sites, and it wasn't all of them, it was just some of them, was forest management. And in all cases, there was either voluntary conservation happening from the landowner, or there was an Oregon Department of Forestry Scenic Conservancy designation. And so I think maybe that is the reason that there aren't specific policies in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, and the only items in the zoning ordinance that come to my mind immediately relate to communication towers, and they have some special requirements if they are impacting a designated scenic area. But so far, of the towers that I've worked on, I don't think I've come across any yet that have been close to or in a scenic area.
Okay, so if we did want to protect them, what would be our options?
We're talking about scenery, so I can't say that your house is in my way, so I want it out of the way so I can see. I don't know. I think that recognizing that what's there is important, I think, in the plan, but I don't know if further regulation is warranted.
Right, and the policies do, I mean, like, they're very vague in that they're like, we want to preserve these for future, you know, generations and stuff like that. And then I think, yeah, just, I don't know either with just it being like a scenic view and like what much more there is to do than that.
Okay, so do we want to just say, you know, that for all of these, or is there a point in going through them individually if they all kind of have the same characteristics of, you know, how we would go about it?
I mean, I'm just curious to know what they are. Like, I'm not familiar with the Plimpton Creek Falls. If anyone knows anything about that, I'd be curious to hear about it.
I don't. Again, I wish I did, but yeah, I know where Plimpton Creek is. Obviously, it's in Westport, but I've never gone up there, taking a look around.
So do we want to have a homework assignment that everyone has to take one of these and go somewhere they haven't been, report back?
I mean, some of them are in private land, so like, I don't know how possible that is.
I'll try to get to it in a year, within the year, maybe next summer.
Thanks, Dick. Okay, so it doesn't seem like we're going to add anything specific to the comp plan that is for these sites. So what is the next thing that we want to talk about?
Okay, are there any sites that you're aware of just from living in the area that you feel should be included in the inventory?
You have the Eagle Sanctuary, but that might already have some designations as far as areas that are particular to the Northeast area. But I assume that's very well protected.
There's this cool spot in my backyard in the forest. There's like a fallen tree and then this other one that has a tree growing out of it, and I like to go there.
Nice try, Tally. Nice try. No, I can't think. I mean, it's hard for me to parse and like really just go for like scenic vista, you know, like I'm like, oh, this because of like, you know, like even the Eagle Sanctuary, it's like wildlife habitat, right? Like, or are you thinking that it is an inherently like a beautiful spot that needs protecting, like under, you know, I don't know.
What about Benson Island? I don't know if there's anything protected out there, but it's like a nice walk that you can do and a place that people go kayaking. I don't know. That's,
the Bradley Hill, I don't know. That is a vista. Turn out, I guess it's already a park. So. I think, you know, in the larger context,
I was just asking Jed if he's seen any great vistas on the Hampton land that we need to know about.
Oh, I mean, I see great vistas on Hampton land every day, but you know, I don't know. They move around as the trees grow up in front of them. So up on top of not Wikia, but yeah, it's you know, that's one of the benefits of the job. It's a little I'm behind the ball a little bit now, behind the curve a little bit now, but I went and looked at a map, and it looks like around Nat Creek that land is managed by the Department of Forestry, so that is public land, it appears.
Okay. Are there any threats or potential opportunities for the sites that we have inventoried that you feel might pop up over the next 20 years that we need to think about?
I've got another one, Napa Docks, which is a county-owned property, that is scenic. And as a commissioner, I failed to turn that into an accessible place where you could use it for, I thought it should be provide access to the river for recreational boaters. That was, but that's an area that the county owns that is very scenic. That could be enhanced,
So
I was going to speak like with Saddle Mountain and I can't speak to the Nehalem River, but I think in light of their recreational significance, that those areas make a lot of sense. So I kind of see that as the more important designation that needs to be made. Which isn't really our area. So.
okay, so I know we talked a few meetings ago about wildfire and impacts, on groundwater resources and habitat resource. What about possible threats from wildfire? Would that be an issue? And if it is, what could the county help do through its comp plan to maybe address some of those issues?
Do you have any sample scale of what you would mean? I'm not quite following it as far as.
Well, I'm just trying to think of. I'm not saying that this is a real issue. It is a real issue, but maybe not the one we are concerned about with these resources. But I'm trying to think of things that could potentially threaten or may change these inventoried resources. So we're looking at the state. Well, in this case, we don't have any federal scenic rivers. We don't have a designated state waterland or waterway in the Northeast or trails, but thinking about our scenic views and sites. So, as we face I'm sorry, my brain is so tired. This is my second back-to-back CAC meeting this afternoon, so my brain is fried. As we're looking at things that could possibly threaten it. So as we become more prone to wildfires, what impact could that possibly have? Are there things that we could do to help address wildfire impacts that could hurt these resources?
I mean, I feel like,
one example.
go ahead.
I was just going to share an example, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, of a couple of years ago outside of Clatsop County, when there were wildfires that destroyed a lot of incredibly scenic areas in the Columbia River Gorge. And, personally, I'm not sure what could have stopped that, because it was just basically bad human behavior that caused those fires. But definitely very valuable scenic resources were at least temporarily destroyed by the fire.
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to say, is like definitely a threat, but I can't think of what I would instruct the county to do in those situations,
No smoking or open flame in the scenic areas.
Okay. So can we think of any other possible things that might come up that might impact these scenic areas? I mean, we have them listed in our comp plan. They're not really publicized very much to tourists, but if they were to be, for example, or should we promote them more? Do we want to encourage more people to visit these sites?
No, that could be a goal. We don't want to encourage anybody to come here. So
I think that's a good question though, Gail, and thinking about how all these issues are always interrelated. We have coming up, pretty far later on, but the goal 8 is recreational lands. And so that obviously ties in here. And then goal 9 is economic development and diversity. So if you're thinking about tourism, that obviously ties into goal 9 and goal 8.
yeah, just thinking out loud, kind of the idea, with the example of the gorge and the fires, I don't know if management of the landscape in such a way that would decrease wildfire devastation. That's all I can come up with.
So if the committee doesn't mind if I throw something out there, it seems to me probably most of these areas are bordered by parcels that are zoned, forest use only, maybe EFU, that sort of thing. It would occur to me that the thing that might impact these things the most is if the zoning on neighboring parcels was to change. I don't know how much time folks have spent out in our neighbors to the east in Idaho who have very different land use laws, but there's some incredibly beautiful spots of the Snake River that you're enjoying, and then you'll see a McMansion that's built right up onto the edge of the canyon, and that seems to do some damage to the scenic view to me. So I just kind of maintaining some of the current land use regulations might be important.
It's my opinion that, Oregon's history with starting with Senate Bill 100, where they, started by trying to protect farmland in the Willamette Valley. I think we've gotten ahead of that, and we're, I would argue, very different than Idaho with our land use planning. But I think Oregon is managing very actively to avoid what you saw in Idaho.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I think that the reason we don't see that is because of the excellent stuff that's happened here historically.
Okay, so any other issues or items that we can think of right off the top of our heads that may impact over the next 20 years?
I don't know how it will affect, but through climate change, things might change in these scenic areas. I don't know how exactly, but I think that's just something we have to be aware of.
One that just popped into my mind as a potentially conflicting with scenic resources would be wind power generation or offshore power generation.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I think wind power generation is something to be encouraged, but I'm not sure how viable our area is for that. If it's you need consistent, steady wind with, and I don't know if our area has the consistency. I think it would, like maybe up on some ridges potentially, or but that is an interesting one. That's a very interesting one. That's I think the staff should wrestle with to figure out how to do that, because honestly, if I have been approached in the past to put windmills on the farm that we have here, and I was interested in it, but mostly I don't know if it was permissible on EFU land at the time. What was the deterrent was I didn't want to be on the hook financially for a project that would, may or may not work, and that's kind of where I felt I was taking on debt and obligations that I didn't necessarily know I would see my way through. But I think the wind power generation is a very definitely worth the staff's time to figure out how you want to tackle that.
I can share definitively that there are businesses out there that are actively exploring different parts of the county and looking at setting up test equipment to determine the feasibility of wind power generation.
Yeah, we're reviewing an application right now. They had gone to the Planning Commission for conditional use approval to do a test tower up on Nikolai Ridge, and their permits are in now for review. And if their testing results will support a turbine farm up there, then they are looking at that, and they're looking at wind turbines that are potentially 600 feet in height. So.
Yeah, the Nikolai Ridge is kind of removed. Eastern Clatsop County is less populated, and you really have to know which direction you're looking at exactly to know from, you know, it's difficult to see, I guess, so it wouldn't necessarily affect the scenic value, I think, of the overall forested area, in my opinion. That is interesting. It's very interesting to me.
Okay. If nobody has anything else on table 3, we can always incorporate ideas later, but if nobody has any additional ideas right now, we can go back to the agenda and see where we're at.
Okay, so are we just at public comment and input?
Yep.
Okay. Does anyone have any public comments? Jed, did you want to say anything else?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, do any of the other members have anything they'd like to add?
I mean, I would like to just make sure that with some of these inventory things that we check in with Jen and Cheryl just to make sure, you know, that they didn't have anything to add. But yeah, other than that.
Great, thanks. I agree.
I would just reiterate, I think it's fascinating about the windmill because I could see that being more of a conflict with a scenic area than pretty much anything else that I could think of. So that is interesting to me anyway.
Yeah, and that is one of those things where the comp plan has to balance these different, you know, interests where, you know, we're gonna, I think you're right, like alternative energy technology is gonna have to be something that we prioritize in the future. And so, you know, if that site is the best site for that, you know, is that value more important than, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I like the solar panels look on my house. I think it's cool. I don't mind seeing windmills in a vista personally, but I know other people might have a different opinion of that. But, you know, that is something we'll have to, like, trade off.
I worked in northern Germany, and they have near Denmark. They have a lot of windmills there, thousands of windmills. So it's a interesting conversation because they, you know, people complain about the shadows in their windows, you know. But anyway, I in large think our county should be encouraging. This is the sort of thing I believe we should encourage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah, I think that's definitely worth some more thought and talking about. Any other comments or input from the staff or members? Okay, then we will, Gail, do you have anything else you want to say before we adjourn?
No, nothing. Thank you. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Okay, happy holidays, everyone. Thanks everyone for showing up. Take care. Bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.